What is the scariest thing you've ever seen while driving at night?
A fucking owl standing on the carcass of a large buck in the mountains at 3:05 am. All you see as you approach are two glowing red orbs, then slowly it becomes huge dark form standing on the edge of the road with eyes of fire. Then you get close enough and this massive fucking owl just gives you the death stare as you go past. You realize it was just a large ass owl standing on the remains of fresh roadkill. Freaked me out for the rest of the dark part of the drive. Edit. Changed corpse to carcass because a couple cunts can't accept the interchangeability of the English language.
Someone I knew locally came across a Jeep that had just crashed into the ditch on a highway at night, flipped on its stop, wheels still turning kind of thing. He was the first on scene so-called 911 and ran down into the ditch. The driver, who was badly mangled, had been tossed from the car and was dying. This guy held him and the driver died in his arms. The weirdest part of it all was that he found out the next day that it was his cousin, but he hadn't been able to recognize him.
Driving down a two-lane divided highway. I came up to a couple semis and went into the left lane to pass. I did a shoulder check to get back into the right lane when I saw headlights in front of me. In my lane. The car was going the wrong way. I managed to swerve into the ditch, felt like I was mere centimeters from death. Thought my wife's scream would be the last thing I ever hear. And I never want to hear it again. The semis I passed all pulled to the shoulder to come check on us. Didn't see the car anywhere. I think they just kept going. Had to pull into a gas station after and collect myself. Edit, rephrase to make less confusing.
I was following a gray Toyota Tundra in a massive blizzard through Montana on McDonald Pass. He was going pretty quick most of the way but must have been unfamiliar with how steep the final few miles are. He got away from me as I slowed down to about 35. Not 5 minutes later I passed his tire marks in the fresh snow that went off the side of the mountain. Pulled over and looked down to see his truck upside down and on fire about 300 yards down. Called 911. He didn't die but was burnt up pretty bad. Sad and scary, and don't go 50 in the snow just because you have a truck or 4WD. An asshole overtaking a petrol tanker around a blind corner, coming my way. Scared the shit out of me.
I had just finished driving for Uber and was driving down the access road to my home around 3 am when I saw a body lying completely lifeless next to one of those motorized scooters. I pulled over and flagged down his buddies who were drunk and kept going without realizing their friend was lying on the ground. Ambulance arrived and took the kid away, but I never came to find out if he made it. FCK those scooters, man. Not me but a friend. After dropping me off at my house around 2 am, my friend calls me and tells me to pick my doors. He said he saw a man standing in the middle of the road and that as he passed him the man kept staring through him. Not at him really, but like there was something behind him in his backseat. He also said he could barely make out anything about the man other than his large eyes and trench coat. What really terrified me is that this happened on a street that only my family lives on and no one would have been out that night. Also we're a solid mile and a half from the nearest neighbor. Freaked me the hell out. Edit, lock not pick.
I slammed the brakes once because I saw a deer in my peripheral vision. Upon closer inspection, it was a mounted deer head on a stick in the middle of the woods. Slammed the gas after I realized that.
I used to deliver pizza, and often had deliveries right at midnight when we closed. One time, late at night, I'm driving back to the store through a small neighborhood. Up ahead I see something. It's perfectly spherical bright/shiny thing, just hovering about 6 feet off the ground. Not moving at all. I pull up very slowly. Still doesn't move. Still can't comprehend what I'm looking at. Just this shiny hovering orb in the road at midnight. At this point my curiosity has overridden my fear. I'm the guy in the horror movie who dies first because I just gotta know. Either I die or I get a cool story, right? So I hop out of the car, and slowly walk up to it. I'm right in front of it and still can't understand what I'm seeing. So I reach out and touch it. It's a balloon. One of those foil birthday balloons with the streetlights shining on it, making it look weird out of context in the middle of the night on an empty road.
Frogs. Fucking. Everywhere. Like hundreds of frogs all over the road.
A dead, butchered horse laying in the road. Someone had completely skinned and butchered a horse, took the choice pieces of meat, and just dumped it on the highway. I almost crashed into it. Driving to work at 4:30 a.m. and seeing a cyclist with his head split open and brains on the road.
I was fetching someone from his workplace. Had to go through some fields, and some parts of the road were dark. I saw a thin, long object, wiggling at an upright position at the side of the road in front of me. Totally freaked me out. I thought I was finally experiencing something extraordinary. As I got closer, I realized it was a tail of a cow. It must have escaped from some field and was hanging around at the side of the road. The cow itself was black, the tail slightly lighter in color. That's why I only saw the tail moving first without seeing the whole cow first.
A lonely abandoned shack with a bunch of arrows pointing to it. Saying come in. Edit. To answer some questions, I was on my way to Texas to see family and the GPS took us down a back road. My mom and I joked that it was a sex dungeon.
3 a.m. on a lonely road and I was the passenger. An old man only wearing a bra, panties and high heels was casually walking down the road. My friend who was driving didn't believe me and went back around. Sure enough, he saw him and we were like WTF.
I dropped my GF off the night we saw the Mothman Prophecies. It wasn't a super scary movie, but it had some scares. I take the interstate home. On the way, there is a curve where there aren't any lights. Just a dark stretch of interstate. As I came around the bend, there was a guy in a black trench coat walking along the side of the road. As it was about 3 a.m., I guess I started him. So, when my headlights hit him, he whipped around and I swear he stared me right in the eyes. My heart jumped into my throat. The whole event lasted maybe 2 seconds tops, but it had my heart racing. Not paranormal, but definitely scary for me.
A hitchhiker almost leaping out in front of my car on a dark forest road late at night. The woman literally popped out of nowhere. Had to drift into the oncoming lane. Luckily there was no one else and painted median there. Read a police report that she ended up getting hit minutes after I drove by. She was intoxicated and running from the police. Pretty fucking creepy. I hope she's alright. I can't imagine what the driver that hit her was thinking.
I got off on my exit, and the whole road was covered in blood. I put on my brights and saw a bisected body of a large animal. It just made me so sad.
When I first started learning to drive, I was working for my dad, and one day after work he asked if I wanted to drive home. I was like alright. So I got on the highway headed for home, and while driving, I looked in the rear view and a guy on a crotch rocket was coming up behind me. I thought nothing of it. I was sure he would pass or slow down. I look ahead again and a few moments later I hear this sound, like metal scraping against the ground. I look around and then look back into the rear view, and the bike was on its side, spinning down the highway, and behind it I could see the biker on his back, legs and arms flailing kind of like a baby on its back in a crib. Then I watched as he disappeared under the vehicle behind him. And #X200B. I was so freaked out driving after that I didn't want to drive for weeks following the incident. Then eventually got over it. Still I can see the guy in my mind just sliding along the ground flailing about then being swallowed under another car.
I was driving on a near-empty freeway at midnight when I saw a weird flickering light on the freeway. It was super dark and barely any lights besides headlights, so I slowed down a bit and merged a lane over. As I passed I got a good look and it was a car absolutely destroyed and on fire. I was a little shocked and ended up driving a bit past it before I really saw what it was, and by the time I thought about pulling over it was already far behind me and a cop sped past me on the other side, so I knew they were aware of what happened.
I was driving on the expressway around 2 a.m. and a semi hit a car and it went into the median. The car basically folded into itself and was beyond smashed. I can't imagine that person survived. It was incredibly sad and terrifying to see.
I was driving home late one night and was driving on a dark stretch of the highway. Suddenly a body was in front of me. I tried to swerve out of the way but it was too late. My bumper was hanging on the ground. The guy died. And I went into a nearby gas station not knowing what to do. Was 18. When the tow truck pulled my car up onto it, there were a bunch of blood and guts on the bottom. I couldn't get that image out of my head. Apparently a drunk driver with 5 DWIs had hit a guy on the motorcycle prior, for years after I had serious depression and thought about it every night before sleep. A closed Waffle House.
Long stretch of road, not so much as a driveway for 100 miles in either direction. Late at night in this middle of nowhere road, there was a car on the side of the road that was on fire. And I don't mean like an engine fire, I mean completely engulfed in flames. Not a single person or another car anywhere around it. I hadn't even driven past a car in over an hour. While traveling east just outside Flagstaff, Arizona around midnight, I was in the fast lane doing about 80 miles per hour. There was a bend in the road and you could see the headlights of the westbound lanes filter in between the trees. It was funny because I thought the lights kinda looked like they were coming at me. Then they really were. I screamed obscenities and jerked the wheel just in time to let a speeding wrong way driver fly by me in the lane I was just in. After skidding to a stop in the shoulder, I called the cops to report it. Could you describe the vehicle? Yes, it was a dark blur with headlights.
I was a very young woman driving home after clubbing. About 2 a.m. through Hollywood. I was pulling up to a stop sign on Cahuenga, about 3 blocks from Hollywood Boulevard, when a bunch of guys began to casually stroll onto the crosswalk, coming from both sides. I hit the gas and ran the stop sign without even thinking. They cursed and ran after me, but those boys were ready to jack me. My instincts took over before I even realized what was happening.
Killer clown on the side of a deserted country road during the 2016 clownpocalypse. I think I cried. Driving down country highways late at night and seeing coyotes just standing on the side of the road can be pretty unnerving.
Was vacationing in Newfoundland, and we ended up leaving dinner kind of late en route to our stop for the evening. Was hoping to make it before dusk, but had to drive about 30 minutes in the twilight. Nothing scarier than coming around a corner in the road and seeing a moose standing on the shoulder right next to the car, and realizing it almost ended your life.
A 6-foot kangaroo standing in the middle of a pitch-black road at 3 a.m. in the morning, missed it by a bee's dick. A body in the ditch. Thought it was a deer as I approached, and then my brain was like, deer don't wear boots. I was shaking as I did a U-turn to make sure the person was alive. They were just drunk and some people stopped as well. An emergency was called. I was so shaken up by it. Edit, wow, can't build the upvotes. Thanks.
Not sure if this will count, but here we go. Back in my 20s I was putting myself through uni by working night shifts at a factory. Money was great, but between full-time work and full-time study I was constantly exhausted. Sleep got worse when I picked up a second job to make ends meet. Parents split up and Dad went into depression, so he wasn't working, you see. Anyway, after months I kept falling asleep at the wheel on the way home from work just before dawn around 4 a.m. One time as I was driving home all alone after work, I saw half a dozen crocodiles on the road. I swerved to avoid hitting them and almost crashed the car. I was terrified in the moment because they came out of nowhere and were huge, and I'd never seen crocodiles in real life before, let alone on a freeway. I pulled over the car and looked in my rear view mirror, but nothing was there. To this day I don't know if I dreamed those crocodiles or if they were a hallucination from sleep deprivation. Scariest thing I've ever seen, and I'm so thankful no one was on the road at the time too.
At a busy intersection, guy crashed into a pole next to me. He then immediately got out of the car and started running. No one was after him. I sat there at the red light wondering if this guy planted a car bomb.
I saw a semi, a large car hauler, hit a deer. The deer got pulled between the double axles of the tractor and rolled there for a short time before finally finishing being run over. It was horrible. It was over 10 years ago, and the image is still clear in my mind.
Me and some friends were going out one night. We're driving down a pretty big city street with about 2 lanes on each side, 45 miles per hour speed limit. This dude was riding a bike against traffic. My friend tried to swerve and the guy swerved the same direction as us. He gets hit and does a faceplant right into the windshield on the passenger side where I was sitting. He flips over the car and is just lying in the middle of the road. Don't know if the guy died, but it didn't look good. They landed a helicopter in the middle of the road and took him to the hospital. Witnesses stopped and waited with us, verifying that it wasn't our fault, and cops let us go on our way. Crazy night.
Night shift. Driving home. Child right in the middle of the street. Noped out in there because I watched those car hijacks. Took twice as long to get home though. Edit. I did call the cops and they caught the guys mid-act. Husband, wife and a child. Only reason I was informed by this is because my police bud.
I was driving from New Hampshire, USA, to Colorado Springs, Colorado, USA. We had to go through Kansas and never heard of a supercell, but apparently those beautiful clouds turned into swirly death traps called tornadoes well as night hit and the strongest became difficult to drive through. We slowed down because it was hard to see through the downpouring rain. Well, lucky me looked outside to my left into a field, and in between lightning flashes a tornado was swirling in motion about a mile away from us. I've never shat myself so fast and hard before. I tell you, I will never go back to Kansas in a Subaru Outback. If I go back it's gonna be in a tank. After seeing The Ring 2 with friends late one night, I had just dropped off one of them at their house in the middle of nowhere. I was driving down a dark rural road through trees and I turned a corner going fairly fast and there were like 5 deer in the middle of the road. I was able to stop before hitting them, but I couldn't go anywhere until they moved, so I sat there until they finished crossing the road. If anyone remembers the terrible movie that was The Ring 2, there is this scene: https://www.youtube.com/watch v=v10l157swm, where they get stopped by a deer, then the deer attacks. That was all I could think about as I waited for the deer to cross. Realistically, it probably took less than a minute, but man did it feel like an hour. Eventually though they all pranced across and I kept driving. But to this day I still remember it and it still comes up in my nightmares sometimes. I was driving on a lifted interstate without a shoulder. It's like 3 a.m. and no one else in the road. Round a bend and see a guy with no legs and no arms propped up against the railing. He looked like he was 3 days into a hardcore bender.
A lady tried to use my truck to commit suicide. I was going 40 and she jumped towards my truck. It happened so fast I couldn't stop in time and her head smashed out my driver's side window. Scared the shit out of me. At first I didn't know that I hit a person until I looked back and saw her body in the road. She didn't die that day, but as soon as she got out of the hospital, she went back and did the same thing. This time it was a semi-truck and she didn't make it. Super sad story.
One of those killer clowns in 2016. He started chasing my car in the pitch black. There's worse, but I haven't experienced it.
Was coming home late from a midnight shift. It was 6 a.m. but still dark. Had to make a left onto my road but needed to stop because traffic. In my rear view mirror I see a truck coming up and he looks like he's going fast. I blinked my stop lights a bit to alert him. He wasn't going to stop. Motherfucker zooms around me to my right going way over the speed limit and nearly ran himself in the dig. To this day I still don't know how he avoided missing the road sign that was there too. I was driving home at like 10 p.m., still light out, down a road that's famous for deer running across and dying. I went past a group of deer, a couple of them were watching me, and a couple of them were running alongside the road. When I looked out my window at the ones running alongside the road, there was one that looked starved and its ribs were all visible through its skin, but its skin was also rotting and you could see the flesh and muscles underneath. I am very squeamish person and this almost had me throwing up in my car. Look out for the zombie deer in NKY, it's been spotted by some classmates too. Update, the deer doesn't have CWD, they have already gotten reports about it and they found the deer. According to Fish and Wildlife the deer just has some really bad warts. I really don't believe it. But maybe that deer's warts eat away at its skin or it got mangled when it got hit by a car.
Driving home after a get-together and I saw headlights that seemed funny. It was from a car driving the wrong way and I swerved at the very last second. Driver was drunk and hit a van carrying a family, 3 people died, the drunk driver lived.
I was driving up a canyon at 1 a.m., on my way to my parents' cabin. I came around an S-curve, and a naked man jumped in front of me, and over the guardrail. I told my parents, and they assured me it was a deer. I'm no wizard, but I can surely tell the anatomical differences between a deer and a human. Scariest thing I've ever seen in my life. I still can't explain it.
One night on a long drive, this guy pulled up alongside me. And when I glanced over I noticed he had his pants down and was watching me masturbate.